The millionaire's son is having a heart attack, and only the janitor's 7-year-old daughter tries to save him. "I'm a doctor," said the girl. "Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story." The marble floors of Harrison Towers gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, reflecting the wealth that Charles Harrison had built over 3 decades. But on this particular Tuesday morning, those pristine floors would witness something that no money could buy, a miracle that would shake the very foundation of what everyone believed possible. 7-year-old William Harrison was racing through the lobby, his school backpack bouncing against his small frame. He was late for his private tutor session on the 15th floor, and his father's stern voice still echoed in his mind. "Punctuality is the foundation of success, William." The elevator climbed steadily, 5th floor, 6th, 7th, when suddenly William's world began to spin. His chest tightened like a steel band was wrapping around his ribcage. The boy gasped, clutching at his shirt as pain shot through his left arm. His face turned ghostly pale, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Help," he whispered, but the word barely escaped his lips before he collapsed. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 10th floor, and the doors slid open to reveal a nightmare. William lay motionless on the polished elevator floor, his breathing shallow and irregular, his lips turning blue. 7-year-old Sophia Miller was mopping the hallway when she heard the elevator arrive. As the daughter of Robert Miller, the building's night janitor, she often came to work with her father during school holidays. She was small for her age, with dark curls that seemed to have a mind of their own and intelligent brown eyes that held depths far beyond her years. When Sophia saw William's still form, something extraordinary happened. While any other child might have screamed or run for help, Sophia dropped her small mop and walked calmly into the elevator. "Don't worry," she said softly, kneeling beside the unconscious boy. "I'm a doctor." The words hung in the air like an impossibility. This 7-year-old girl, wearing worn sneakers and a faded Disney t-shirt, spoke with a confidence that seemed to belong to someone decades older. Sophia placed her small hands on William's chest and began compressions with a precision that defied logic. Her technique was flawless. 30 compressions followed by rescue breaths, repeated with mechanical accuracy. Her tiny fingers found his pulse points with the skill of a seasoned physician. "Come on, William," she whispered, as if she'd known his name all along. "Your heart just needs to remember how to beat properly." And then, like a switch being flipped, William's eyes fluttered open. Color returned to his cheeks as his breathing stabilized. He looked up at the girl who had somehow pulled him back from the brink of death. Who are you?" he managed to whisper. "I'm Sophia," she replied simply, "and you're going to be just fine." But as William's strength returned, Sophia seemed to grow paler. She swayed slightly, as if performing the miracle had drained something vital from her small body. The elevator doors began to close when Charles Harrison's voice boomed from the hallway. "William! William! Where are you?" The doors reopened to reveal the building's owner, a man whose net worth was measured in billions, staring at a scene that would change his life forever. His son, whom he'd just sent upstairs, was sitting up in the elevator, very much alive. Beside him knelt a child he'd never seen before, the janitor's daughter, looking exhausted but oddly serene. "What happened here?" Charles demanded, his business mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. "She saved me, Dad," William said, his voice still weak but filled with wonder. "She said she was a doctor and she saved my life." Charles Harrison looked at Sophia Miller, this small girl with dirt under her fingernails and compassion in her eyes, and felt his ordered world begin to crack. Because somehow, impossibly, this 7-year-old child had just performed a medical miracle that would have challenged the most experienced physicians. And as he helped his son to his feet, one question burned in Charles Harrison's mind. How could a janitor's daughter know exactly what to do when his own son was dying? The answer to that question would lead them all down a path none of them could have imagined. A journey that would reveal secrets buried deep in the past and challenge everything they thought they knew about the thin line between life and death. The private hospital room on Park Avenue buzzed with the finest medical equipment money could buy. Monitors beeped steadily, their green lines tracing William's now stable heartbeat across digital screens. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, one of New York's most respected cardiologists, reviewed William's test results with a frown that deepened with each page she turned. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, Mr. Harrison," she said, removing her glasses and setting them on the polished bedside table. "What happened to your son should have been fatal. 7-year-olds don't survive massive cardiac arrests without immediate professional intervention. The damage to his heart muscle should have been catastrophic." Charles paced by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghost-like against the city skyline. His mind raced faster than his footsteps, replaying the impossible scene in the elevator over and over. But he did survive. That girl. She knew exactly what to do. Every movement was precise, professional. The CPR technique was flawless, Dr. Morrison admitted reluctantly, her clinical mask slipping to reveal genuine bewilderment. "Better than most paramedics I've worked with. The compression depth, the rhythm, the airway management. It was textbook perfect. But Charles, she's 7 years old. Medical students train for years to achieve that level of competency." "Doctor..." Morrison pulled up William's cardiac imaging on her tablet, pointing to areas that should have shown damage. "Look at this. His heart tissue shows signs of cellular regeneration that I've never seen before. It's as if her intervention didn't just restart his heart, it somehow healed it." Meanwhile, in the building's basement maintenance office, Robert Miller was trying to make sense of his own impossible situation. The cramped space, filled with cleaning supplies and maintenance schedules, felt even smaller as he watched his daughter with growing concern. Sophia sat quietly on an old chair, coloring in a medical textbook she'd somehow acquired and filled with accurate anatomical drawings. The illustrations were far beyond anything a 7-year-old should be capable of creating. Perfect cross-sections of organs, detailed neural pathways, and precise surgical procedures covered the margins of every page. "Sophia," Robert said gently, kneeling beside her chair. His work clothes still smelled of industrial cleaner, but his voice carried the infinite tenderness of a father trying to understand his extraordinary child. "Honey, where did you learn to help that boy today?" "Mommy taught me," Sophia replied, without looking up from her drawing of a perfect human heart, complete with labeled ventricles and arteries. "She said people get sick, and sometimes we're the only ones who can help them. She said I had to remember everything, even when it didn't make sense." Robert's chest tightened with grief and confusion. His wife, Dr. Elena Vasquez Miller, had died in a car accident 3 years ago when Sophia was only 4. Elena had been a brilliant emergency physician, renowned for her ability to save patients that other doctors had given up on, but Sophia had been too young to learn anything medical from her. Hadn't she? Robert watched as his daughter turned the page and began sketching a detailed diagram of cardiac electrical pathways, her small fingers moving with the confidence of someone who had studied these systems for decades. That evening, Charles Harrison made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of sending his security team to investigate, he walked down to the basement personally. The elevator ride seemed endless as he descended from his penthouse world to the building's hidden foundation. He found Robert Miller organizing cleaning supplies, while Sophia sat nearby, quietly reading a book that made Charles's blood run cold. It was Gray's Anatomy, the comprehensive medical textbook used by medical students worldwide, but she wasn't just looking at pictures. Her lips moved silently as she read, and occasionally she would nod, as if confirming something she already knew. "Mr. Harrison!" Robert jumped up, nearly knocking over a bucket of cleaning supplies. His face flushed with embarrassment and fear. "Sir, we didn't expect. Is William all right? Sophia's been worried about him all day." "How is she reading that?" Charles interrupted, pointing at Sophia, who continued turning pages with the focused intensity of a medical resident preparing for board exams. The massive textbook dwarfed her small frame, yet she handled it with familiar ease. "I don't know," Robert admitted, his voice breaking under the weight of months of accumulated worry. "Ever since Elena died, Sophia has been different. She talks about medical procedures like she's lived them. She draws organs with perfect accuracy. Yesterday, I found her explaining mitochondrial function to her stuffed animals using terminology I had to look up online." Robert led Charles to a corner where Sophia's drawings covered the wall like a medical museum. Detailed anatomical sketches, surgical procedures, and pharmaceutical molecular structures created a gallery that would have impressed any medical school professor. Charles approached Sophia carefully, the way one might approach a wild animal, with respect and no small amount of fear. "Hello, Sophia. I'm William's father. I wanted to thank you for saving my son's life." She looked up with those impossibly mature eyes, and Charles felt like he was staring into depths that shouldn't exist in a child's face. "Is William okay? His arrhythmia should stabilize within 48 hours, but you'll want to monitor his electrolyte levels. Magnesium deficiency can trigger recurrent episodes." The words hit Charles like a physical blow. This child was discussing cardiac recovery with the precision of a specialist who had treated thousands of similar cases. "Sophia," Charles said softly, crouching down to her eye level, "where did you learn those words? Those are very advanced medical terms." "From here." She tapped her temple with a small finger. "Sometimes I just know things. It's like there's a library in my head that I can't control. Mommy said that some people are born with gifts, and we have to use them to help others, even when people don't understand." Charles felt a chill run down his spine. "What else do you remember about your mother?" She had long black hair that smelled like lavender and always carried a stethoscope with a butterfly sticker on it. Her hands were soft but strong, and she could make people feel better just by touching them. Sophia paused, her small face growing troubled. But she was scared of something toward the end. Someone was making her afraid. She would check the locks twice and look out the windows when she thought I wasn't watching. Robert's face went pale. "Sophia, we've talked about this. Mommy died in an accident. The roads were icy that night." "No, Daddy," Sophia said with disturbing certainty, closing the medical textbook with a soft thud. "She was running away from something bad. She told me the night before she left. She said if anything happened to her, I had to remember everything she taught me, even the things I didn't understand yet. She said someone might try to hurt the people I was meant to help." Charles and Robert exchanged glances loaded with implications neither wanted to consider. Elena's death had been ruled accidental. Her car had skidded off a rain-slicked road during a winter storm. But now, hearing his daughter's words, Robert felt doubt creeping into his heart like poison. That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, surrounded by the empire he'd built through decades of calculated risks and strategic investments. But his mind was consumed by a 7-year-old girl who spoke of medical mysteries and dead mothers who might not have died accidentally. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Morrison Investigations. We never close. This is Charles Harrison. I need you to find everything you can about Dr. Elena Vasquez Miller. Her death, her background, her research, everything, and I need it done quietly." The next morning brought William home from the hospital with a clean bill of health that mystified his doctors. Dr. Morrison had run every test imaginable. But William's heart showed no signs of the trauma it had endured just 48 hours earlier. As Charles watched his son bounce around their penthouse apartment, alive and vibrant, he couldn't stop thinking about the girl who had made it possible. The penthouse felt different now, less like a monument to success and more like a fortress protecting secrets he was only beginning to understand. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park stretched out like a green carpet, but Charles found no peace in the familiar view. "Dad," William said, interrupting his father's brooding. The boy was playing with his tablet, but his attention kept drifting to the elevator that had nearly become his tomb. "Can we invite Sophia up here? I want to thank her properly. She saved my life, and I don't even know her favorite color." Charles hesitated. His world and the janitor's world were separated by more than just floors in a building. They were separated by decades of social conditioning, economic disparity, and the invisible barriers that money created. But his son was alive because of that janitor's daughter, and gratitude demanded acknowledgement. An hour later, Sophia Miller stood in the Harrison penthouse, her small frame dwarfed by the opulent surroundings. Designer furniture, original artwork, and crystal fixtures created a museum-like atmosphere that would have intimidated most visitors. But Sophia didn't seem impressed by the wealth surrounding her. Instead, she walked directly to William and placed her small hand on his chest, just above his heart. "Your heart sounds strong," she said with satisfaction, her head tilted as if listening to music only she could hear. "The rhythm is much better. The electrical pathways have stabilized, and the muscle tissue is responding well to the increased oxygenation." "How can you tell just by touching?" William asked, fascinated by this girl who seemed to know secrets that even doctors couldn't explain. "I can feel it," Sophia replied simply, her hand still resting on his chest. "Hearts have their own language. Yours was crying for help yesterday, irregular, desperate, fighting against itself, but now it's singing, strong and steady and happy to be alive." Charles watched this exchange with growing amazement and not a little fear. What kind of child spoke about hearts as if they were conscious beings? What kind of 7-year-old could diagnose cardiac conditions through touch? "Sophia, would you like to see something special?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He led them to his private library, where medical journals and research papers covered one wall, remnants of his abandoned pre-med studies from decades ago. He'd kept them more from nostalgia than necessity, a reminder of the doctor he'd once dreamed of becoming before business had claimed his soul. Sophia's eyes lit up like a child seeing Christmas morning. The leather-bound journals and technical papers seemed to call to her in a way that no toy or game ever had. "May I?" she asked, reaching for a journal on cardiac surgery with the reverence most children reserved for birthday presents. Charles nodded, expecting her to flip through the pictures or struggle with the complex terminology. Instead, Sophia opened to a detailed article about pediatric heart defects and began reading aloud, explaining each procedure with startling accuracy and adding commentary that revealed understanding far beyond her years. "This technique is outdated," she said, pointing to a diagram of a surgical approach. "Dr. Peterson developed a better method in 2019, less invasive, better outcomes for children, and significantly reduced recovery time. The old approach had a 30% complication rate, but the new technique drops that to less than 5%. Charles felt his legs go weak. Dr. Peterson was his personal physician, a cutting-edge specialist whose innovative techniques were known only to the most elite medical circles. The procedure Sophia was describing had been published in a restricted medical journal that cost thousands of dollars to access. "Sophia," he whispered, "how do you know about Dr. Peterson? How do you know about techniques that most doctors have never heard of?" She looked up with those ancient eyes in a child's face. "I know about lots of doctors, Mr. Harrison. Their techniques, their success rates, their specialties. Mommy made sure I would remember everything. She said knowledge was the only inheritance that could never be stolen. Do. The storage unit in Queens looked like a shrine to medical knowledge mixed with the desperate preparations of someone who knew death was coming. Boxes of files, research papers, and photographs covered every surface, creating narrow pathways between towers of accumulated evidence. But it was the wall of pictures that made Charles's blood run cold. Photographs of William, hundreds of them, from ultrasound images taken before his birth to candid shots captured from a distance just months before Elena's death. Medical charts, growth measurements, and detailed cardiac assessments created a timeline of obsessive monitoring that spanned his entire life. Robert stood in the doorway, his face ashen. I found this place 3 days ago. Elena had been paying for it in cash for years. I never knew it existed. She was tracking his condition, Charles said, his voice hollow as he examined chart after chart, documenting William's cardiac development. Look at the detail. Blood pressure readings, growth percentiles, even dietary recommendations. She knew more about my son's health than his own pediatrician. He picked up a thick folder labeled William Harrison Congenital Cardiomyopathy, Predictive Analysis. Inside were medical projections showing exactly when William's heart would begin to fail, complete with probability matrices and intervention strategies. The final date circled in red ink was last Tuesday, the day William collapsed. She knew, Charles whispered, the folder trembling in his hands. She knew exactly when it would happen, down to the day. There's more, Robert said reluctantly, his voice barely audible. He opened another box, revealing dozens of audio recordings organized by date and labeled with meticulous care. She left these for Sophia, I think. I think she was preparing her. With trembling hands, Charles pressed play on a recording dated 3 years ago, the night Eleanor died. The storage unit filled with the sound of a woman's voice, speaking rapid, frightened Spanish before switching to English. Even through the static, Elena's desperation was palpable. Sophia, mi amor, if you're hearing this, then something has happened to me. I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to be brave. Everything I've taught you, every medical procedure, every technique, every piece of knowledge I've put in your beautiful mind, it's all for William Harrison. His heart is going to fail when he turns 7, and you're the only one who can save him. Charles felt the world spinning around him. Why? He demanded to the recording, as if Eleanor could hear him across the years. Why would she care about my son? Elena's voice continued as if answering him, and the next words shattered everything Charles thought he knew about his life. Because William Harrison is not just any child, mi amor. He's your patient, yes, but he's also something more. Something I should have told his father years ago. William is. He's your brother, Sophia. Not by birth, but by something deeper, by design. The recording device clattered to the floor as Charles staggered backward, but Elena's voice continued from the concrete floor, delivering truths that rewrote reality itself. I never told anyone about the IVF clinic mistake 8 years ago. The embryo mix-up that was covered up to protect the clinic's reputation and my career. William has my DNA, Charles. He's genetically my son, too. But the mixing wasn't random. It was deliberate, planned, orchestrated. And Sophia. Sophia carries the genetic memories needed to save him. Duh. The storage unit fell silent, except for the sound of 2 men trying to process a revelation that shattered everything they thought they knew about their children, their lives, and the miracle that had brought them together. Charles looked at Robert with new eyes, seeing not just the janitor whose daughter had saved his son, but the stepfather of his son's biological sister, a sister who had inherited their birth mother's medical knowledge and used it to save the brother she'd never known she had. But if Elena had known all this, if she'd been preparing Sophia for years to save William, then why had she died 3 years too early? And who had wanted to stop her from protecting both children? The answer lay in the final box, which Robert opened with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Dr. James Morrison from Morrison Investigations sat across from Charles in the penthouse, his comprehensive report spread across the mahogany table like pieces of a deadly puzzle. The private investigator's face was grim, etched with the kind of weariness that came from uncovering truths that decent people preferred to keep buried. Elena Vasquez Miller didn't die in an accident, he began without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of 3 sleepless days spent following a trail of digital breadcrumbs through the darkest corners of medical research. Her car's brake lines were cut with surgical precision. Professional job meant to look like mechanical failure during icy conditions. Charles felt his chest tighten, the same crushing sensation William must have experienced in the elevator. Who would want to kill her? She was a doctor, for God's sake. She saved lives. And someone who knew what she'd discovered about the IVF clinic cover-up, Morrison replied, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. Elena had been building a case for months. She had evidence that Harrison Fertility Clinic, the one you invested in 8 years ago, was deliberately mixing embryos for genetic experimentation. 1. The words hit Charles like physical blows, each revelation driving him deeper into a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. His own investment, made in good faith to help couples struggling with infertility, had funded the clinic that had created this impossible situation. "That's impossible," Charles said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I thoroughly vetted that investment. Background checks, financial audits, medical certifications, everything was legitimate." "Was it?" Morrison asked, sliding a photograph across the table. "Because according to these financial records, the clinic's primary researcher was Dr. Victor Castellanos, Elena's former mentor and the man who'd been threatening her for months before her death." Charles stared at the photograph of a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets darker than death itself. Something about the face seemed familiar, but he couldn't place where he'd seen it. "Castellanos has been conducting illegal genetic experiments for years," Morrison continued, opening the folder to reveal page after page of damning evidence. Elena discovered that the embryo mix-up wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, part of a long-term study. They were creating genetic pairs, siblings with enhanced traits who could potentially save each other's lives. "Enhanced traits," Charles whispered, thinking of Sophia's impossible medical knowledge. "Sophia's medical intuition isn't natural learning, Mr. Harrison. It's genetic memory, information encoded in her DNA that activates under specific stress conditions. Elena suspected that William was genetically modified to need saving, and Sophia was modified to save him, a perfect biological partnership." Robert, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke. "You're saying my wife was murdered to cover up some mad scientist's experiment? That our children are, what? Laboratory specimens? I'm saying your wife discovered she'd been part of an experiment, tried to expose it, and died for her efforts," Morrison replied grimly. "But here's the part that's going to destroy you both." He pulled out a final document, a corporate filing from 7 years ago, yellowed with age, but still legally binding. Dr. Victor Castellanos didn't just work at Harrison Fertility Clinic. He founded it. And according to these incorporation papers, his primary investor and business partner was. Morrison paused, looking directly at Charles with something approaching pity. "You, Mr. Harrison, you didn't just fund the clinic. You co-owned it." The room spun around Charles as the full weight of the revelation crashed down on him like a collapsing building. He hadn't just unknowingly invested in the facility that had manipulated his son's genetics. He had been a partner in the very conspiracy that had created this nightmare. Elena had been killed to protect an experiment that he had unwittingly helped fund. An experiment that had made his son a victim and her daughter a savior. And somewhere out there, Dr. Victor Castellanos was still conducting his twisted research, still destroying families in the name of science. But the most terrifying realization was yet to come. If Castellanos had killed Elena to protect his secret, and if he knew that Sophia had successfully saved William, then both children were now in mortal danger. The experiment wasn't over. It had just entered its deadliest phase, and Charles Harrison, billionaire, businessman, and unwitting accomplice, was the only one who could stop it. The secure phone in Charles's study rang at exactly 3:33 a.m., its shrill tone cutting through the penthouse silence like a surgical scalpel. Charles fumbled for the device, his heart hammering against his ribs as he recognized the encrypted number, one that only 3 people in the world possessed. "Harrison," he answered, his voice hoarse with sleep and dread. "Mr. Harrison," came a cultured voice with the faintest trace of a European accent. "Dr. Victor Castellanos. I believe we have much to discuss." Charles's blood turned to ice water in his veins. The man who had orchestrated his son's genetic manipulation, who had murdered Eleanor, was calling him in the dead of night as if they were old friends. "How did you get this number?" Charles demanded, but his voice cracked with fear he couldn't disguise. "I've been watching you for years, my dear partner," Castellanos replied with chilling casualness. "Did you really think our little fertility clinic arrangement was coincidental? You were chosen, Charles, selected for your resources, your influence, and your complete moral flexibility when it comes to achieving your goals." Charles moved to the window, peering down at the street below. Black sedans with tinted windows lined the normally empty avenue. "What do you want?" "I want my research back," Castellanos said, his voice hardening like cooling steel. "The girl has served her purpose admirably. The genetic triggers activated perfectly. The knowledge transfer was flawless, and William's survival confirms that our modifications were successful. But now I need both children for the next phase." "Next phase?" Charles whispered, his grip tightening on the phone until his knuckles went white. "Phase 1 was proving the concept, could we create genetic partnerships between modified siblings? Phase 2 is replication. I need to study how the process works, how the memories transfer, how the healing abilities manifest. Sophia and William are the only successful pair we've produced. They're invaluable." Charles felt bile rising in his throat. "They're children, not laboratory specimens." "They're the future of medicine," Castellanos corrected coldly. "Imagine an army of healers, Charles. Children who instinctively know how to save lives, who carry the accumulated medical knowledge of generations. The applications are limitless. Military medics who never lose a soldier. Disaster response teams who can perform miracles. A new evolution of humanity itself." Through the phone, Charles could hear typing, the clinical sound of data being entered into computers. Castellanos was somewhere nearby, close enough to have his people watching the building. "I'll give you 24 hours to deliver both children to the address I'm sending to your phone," Castellanos continued. "If you refuse, if you try to run, if you contact the authorities, I'll simply take them myself. And I promise you, Charles, my methods will be considerably less gentle than voluntary surrender." The line went dead, leaving Charles staring at his reflection in the dark window. In the glass, he looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, and haunted by choices that had led him to this nightmare. His phone buzzed with an incoming text, an address in industrial Brooklyn, followed by a single word that made his skin crawl. Soon. Charles knew he had to act fast. Within minutes, he was on the phone with Robert, his voice urgent and desperate. "Get Sophia and meet me in the parking garage in 10 minutes. Don't pack anything, don't turn on any lights, and for God's sake, Don't let anyone see you." "What's happening?" Robert asked, but the fear in his voice suggested he already suspected. "Castellanos knows where we are. He's coming for the children." As Charles threw clothes into a bag, his hands shaking with adrenaline, one terrible thought echoed in his mind. How do you protect children from a monster who helped create them? The abandoned subway tunnel beneath Brooklyn felt like descending into the Earth's forgotten heart. Water dripped from rusted pipes, and the air carried the metallic taste of decay and desperation. Charles led their small group through the darkness, guided only by the flashlight app on his phone and directions from Morrison, who had promised them sanctuary in the city's hidden depths. William clutched Sophia's hand, both children moving with the quiet resilience that trauma teaches too early. They had been running for 6 hours, switching cars 3 times and using routes that Morrison swore were invisible to government surveillance. "How much further?" Robert asked, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. He carried a backpack filled with Elena's research files, the only evidence they had of Castellanos' crimes. "2 more blocks through the tunnel system," Morrison replied, his voice tense. "There's an old civil defense bunker from the Cold War era, off the grid, shielded from electronic surveillance and stocked with enough supplies to last weeks." As they walked, Sophia suddenly stopped, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. "We're not alone down here," she whispered, her 7-year-old voice carrying an authority that made all the adults freeze. "What do you mean?" Charles asked, crouching to her eye level. "There are others, other children like us. I can feel them." Sophia's eyes closed in concentration. "They're scared, hurt, some of them are very sick." Morrison's flashlight beam swept the tunnel ahead, revealing nothing but shadows and rust. "That's impossible. These tunnels have been abandoned for decades." But Sophia was already moving forward, following some invisible trail that only she could detect. The adults had no choice but to follow, their footsteps echoing ominously in the confined space. They found the first child 300 yards deeper into the tunnel system. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, huddled in an alcove with a medical chart clutched in her tiny hands. Her eyes held the same ancient wisdom that Charles had learned to recognize in Sophia, and when she saw them, she spoke with devastating clarity. "Are you here to take us back to the White Room?" Morrison's flashlight revealed more children emerging from the shadows. 8 of them, ranging in age from 4 to 10, all carrying medical equipment or research papers, all with eyes that had seen too much and knew too much. "Jesus Christ," Robert breathed. "How many children has he taken?" One of the older boys, maybe 9 years old, stepped forward. His clothes were dirty, but his posture was straight and confident. "Dr. Castellanos brought us here 2 days ago. He said we were going to help with an important experiment. But then the alarm started, and the men in white coats just left us." Sophia knelt beside the youngest girl, her movements gentle and practiced. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," the child replied. "I can fix broken bones just by touching them, but it makes me very tired." Charles felt the world shifting around him once again. "How many of you have abilities?" "All of us," the 9-year-old said matter-of-factly. "Tommy can stop bleeding with his hands. Sarah knows which medicines cure which diseases. Marcus can tell when someone's going to die. We're the successful ones." "Successful ones?" Charles repeated, dreading the answer. "The others died during the modifications," Emma said with heartbreaking simplicity. "Dr. Castellanos said it was for the greater good." Morrison's radio crackled to life, his contact at the NYPD delivering news that made everyone's blood run cold. 3 black SUVs just entered the tunnel system from the Flatbush entrance, full tactical gear. "They're hunting." Charles looked at the group of modified children, these innocent victims of Castellanos' twisted vision, and made a decision that would change everything. "We're not running anymore," he announced, It's time to fight back. But as he spoke, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the tunnels, and Charles realized they might have run out of time to save anyone at all. The civil defense bunker looked like a time capsule from the Cuban Missile Crisis. Maps of nuclear fallout patterns covered the walls, and vintage communication equipment sat silent beside modern laptops that Morrison had somehow managed to set up, despite being 60 feet underground. The 8 rescued children huddled together on military-issued blankets, sharing stories that painted a horrifying picture of Castellanos' operation. William and Sophia sat with them, no longer outsiders, but part of a family none of them had chosen. "He has laboratories in 12 cities," explained Marcus, the boy who could predict death. "His ability made him speak with a gravity that belonged on someone decades older. Children from all over the world. Most don't survive the genetic modifications. We're the ones who developed abilities without dying." Charles felt sick as he processed the scope of Castellanos' operation. "How long has this been going on?" "My earliest memory is from when I was 3, said Sarah, the girl who knew medicines by instinct. "But I remember things from before I was born. Dreams about laboratories and needles and men in white coats changing something inside me." Robert was documenting everything on Morrison's laptop, building a case that would destroy Castellanos if they could survive long enough to present it. Eleanor's files mention something called Project Genesis. It talks about creating a new subspecies of humanity with enhanced healing abilities. While the adults planned their next move, Sophia worked quietly with the other children, teaching them meditation techniques to control their abilities. Charles watched in amazement as she helped Tommy learn to regulate his blood-clotting power and showed Emma how to heal bones without exhausting herself. "You're like us, but stronger," Emma observed, watching Sophia demonstrate a breathing exercise. "Why are you different?" "I think it's because I was made to save someone specific," Sophia replied, glancing at William. "You were all made to heal strangers. I was made to heal my brother." The word brother hung in the air with new meaning. Not just genetic siblings, but children who had found each other across impossible circumstances and chosen to be family. William, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Sophia, when you saved me in the elevator, did you know? Did you know we were related?" "I felt something," she admitted, "like coming home. Like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." Morrison's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made his face go pale. "Bad news. Castellanos has gone public. He's telling the media that a group of terrorists has kidnapped several children who are critical to breakthrough medical research. He's painting us as the villains." Charles felt the walls closing in. "How is that possible?" "He's a respected scientist with government connections and unlimited resources," Morrison replied grimly. "We're a billionaire who fled in the night with other people's children. The optics are terrible." But Sophia stood up with sudden determination. "Then we need to show people the truth, all of us together. Let them see what he really did to us." Charles stared at this remarkable 7-year-old who had saved his son and was now proposing to save them all. "Sophia, if we go public, there's no going back. Castellanos will do everything in his power to discredit us or worse." "He's already trying to hurt us," she replied simply. "At least this way we fight back." As if summoned by her words, Morrison's radio erupted with urgent chatter. "Multiple vehicles converging on your location. They've found the bunker. You have maybe 10 minutes before they breach the entrance." Charles looked around at the group of children who had become his responsibility, his family, his cause. 10 modified kids with abilities that could change the world if they could survive the next hour. "There's another way out," Morrison said, pointing to a map of the tunnel system, "but it leads directly to Castellanos' laboratory. We'd be walking into the lion's den. William stood up, his small hand finding Sophia's. Maybe that's exactly where we need to go. The laboratory, hidden beneath the abandoned textile factory in Queens, looked like something from a nightmare about the future. Surgical suites with robotic arms lined one wall, while banks of computers analyzed genetic sequences in real time. But it was the photographs covering Dr. Castellanos' office walls that made Charles's blood freeze in his veins. Pictures of children, hundreds of them. Some smiled innocently from what looked like school photos. Others lay unconscious on operating tables, their small bodies connected to machines that Charles couldn't begin to identify. And in the center of it all, a photograph of William as a newborn, with a medical chart that contained information that rewrote everything Charles thought he knew about his son's origins. Magnificent, isn't it? Castellanos said from the doorway, his voice filled with the pride of a man showing off his life's work. 20 years of research, billions of dollars in investment, and the complete rewriting of human evolutionary potential. Charles spun around to face the man who had destroyed so many lives in the name of science. Castellanos looked exactly like his photograph, distinguished, confident, and utterly without conscience. Behind him stood 4 men in tactical gear, their weapons trained on the group of children who represented everything Castellanos had worked to create. "Dr. Castellanos," Charles said, trying to keep his voice steady, "let the children go. Your quarrel is with me." "My quarrel is with ignorance," Castellanos replied, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me, Charles? These children represent the future of medicine. They could eliminate disease, revolutionize surgery, even conquer death itself. And you want to hide them away like shameful secrets." Sophia stepped forward, her small frame dwarfed by the laboratory equipment, but her voice carrying absolute authority. "You're wrong. We're not your creations. We're human beings, and what you did to us was evil." Castellanos smiled with the indulgence one might show a precocious pet. "Evil? Child, I gave you abilities that most people can only dream of. You can save lives with a touch. You carry the accumulated medical knowledge of centuries. How is that evil?" "Because you killed our mothers to do it," Sophia replied, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "Because you stole us from our families. Because you treat us like experiments instead of children." "Casualties of progress," Castellanos said dismissively. Then his expression hardened. "But you've served your purpose. The proof of concept is complete. Now I need to understand how the process works so I can replicate it on a global scale." He nodded to his men, who began moving toward the children. But before they could take a step, Morrison's voice crackled through hidden speakers throughout the laboratory. "This is Agent Morrison, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Dr. Castellanos, you're under arrest for human trafficking, child endangerment, and murder. The building is surrounded." Castellanos laughed, the sound echoing off the laboratory walls like breaking glass. "Morrison, you naive fool. Do you think I don't have friends in the government? Do you think this research isn't sanctioned at the highest levels?" Charles felt his world shift once again as Castellanos pulled out a folder marked with official government seals. "Project Genesis has been funded by the Department of Defense for the past decade. Super soldiers who can heal themselves and others. The military applications alone are worth trillions." But it was the next document that delivered the killing blow to everything Charles believed about his life. A genetic analysis chart showing William's true parentage, and the name listed as biological father wasn't Charles Harrison. It was Victor Castellanos. "Surprised?" Castellanos asked, watching Charles's face crumble with the weight of revelation. "Did you really think the embryo mix-up was random? William is my son, Charles. My genetic material, my modifications, my masterpiece. You were just the wealthy fool chosen to raise him until he was old enough for testing." The laboratory spun around Charles as he processed the ultimate betrayal. William, the boy he'd raised, loved and nearly lost, wasn't his son at all. He was the biological child of the monster who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. But as Charles staggered under the weight of this revelation, Sophia's voice cut through his despair like a lifeline. "Genetics don't make a family," she said firmly, taking William's hand. "Love does. And no matter whose DNA William has, Charles Harrison is his real father." Castellanos' smile faded as he realized that his ultimate revelation had failed to break the bonds that held this unlikely family together. "How touching, but irrelevant. You're all coming with me now." That's when the lights went out and the real battle began. The emergency lighting bathed the laboratory in hellish red as Morrison's assault team breached the building from 3 directions simultaneously. But Charles barely noticed the tactical operation unfolding around him. His entire focus was on protecting the children who had become his family, blood relation or not. Castellanos' men moved with military precision, but they hadn't counted on facing opponents with supernatural abilities. Tommy pressed his hands against a guard's wound before the man even realized he'd been cut, healing him instantly, but leaving him so disoriented that he collapsed. Sarah identified the exact pressure point to render another unconscious with a simple touch, but it was Sophia who proved most dangerous to Castellanos' plans. Moving with the confidence of a seasoned physician, she coordinated the other children like a general commanding troops. "Emma, the man by the computer, his ribs are broken. Marcus, tell me which guard is going to fall first. William, stay behind me." "You remarkable little monsters," Castellanos breathed, watching his carefully planned operation dissolve into chaos. "You're even more advanced than I imagined." Charles lunged for the scientist, but Castellanos was ready. A syringe appeared in his hand, the same type Elena's autopsy had found traces of in her system. "Paralytic agent," he explained calmly, "designed specifically for genetically modified subjects. It won't kill them, but it will make them much easier to transport." The syringe was aimed at Sophia's neck when William threw himself between them. The needle pierced his shoulder instead, and within seconds, Charles's son, Castellanos' biological son, crumpled to the laboratory floor. "William!" Sophia screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands moved over his paralyzed form with desperate precision, but whatever Castellanos had injected was beyond even her abilities to counter. "The antidote is in my private safe," Castellanos said with cold satisfaction. "Bring me all the children voluntarily and I'll save him. Continue this foolish resistance and watch him suffocate as the paralysis reaches his respiratory system." Charles felt his heart breaking as he watched William struggle to breathe. The boy's eyes were conscious and aware, but his body was betraying him with each passing second. But Sophia stood up slowly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone far older than her 7 years. "Dr. Castellanos, you made one mistake in all your planning." "What mistake, child?" "You assumed we needed you to save William." Sophia placed her hands on William's chest, and something extraordinary happened. Her skin began to glow with a soft, warm light that spread from her fingertips into William's body. "You taught me to heal, but you never taught me to limit my healing." The paralytic agent, designed to be irreversible, began to break down under Sophia's touch. William's breathing steadied, his fingers began to move, and color returned to his face. Castellanos stared in shock. "That's impossible. The compound is molecularly stable. Nothing can neutralize it." "Nothing you created," Sophia agreed. "But I'm not just your creation anymore. We're not any of your creations. We're children who choose to help each other, and that makes us stronger than anything you can design in a laboratory." Around the room, the other modified children were systematically dismantling Castellanos' operation. They worked not as program subjects, but as a family protecting each other. Emma healed every injury. Tommy stopped every bleeding wound. Sarah neutralized every toxin with intuitive knowledge of their chemical structures. Morrison's team secured the laboratory, but the real victory belonged to the children who had refused to be victims any longer. As Castellanos was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Sophia with something approaching respect. "This isn't over, child. There are others like me, other laboratories, other children who need to be saved." "I know," Sophia replied simply. "That's why we're going to find them all." Charles knelt beside William, who was sitting up and breathing normally. "How do you feel, son?" "Like I have the best sister in the world," William replied, hugging Sophia tightly. But as the laboratory was secured and the immediate danger passed, Charles realized their greatest challenge still lay ahead. 9 modified children with extraordinary abilities, a world that would want to study them, and a promise to find and save others like them. The experiment was over, but their real lives were just beginning. 6 months after the laboratory raid, the Harrison Foundation for Enhanced Children occupied 3 floors of a renovated hospital on Manhattan's Upper East Side. What had once been Charles's private investment office was now a sanctuary, a school, and a medical research facility unlike anything the world had ever seen. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric specialist Charles had recruited from Johns Hopkins, stood in the observation room watching 9 extraordinary children work together in ways that defied medical understanding. "I've been studying their abilities for months," she told Charles, "and I still can't explain how they do what they do." Through the reinforced glass, Sophia guided Tommy and Emma through a complex procedure on a crash test dummy, teaching them to coordinate their healing abilities. William sat nearby, his role not as a healer, but as something even more remarkable, the emotional anchor that kept all the children stable and focused. "It's not just their individual gifts," Charles replied, watching his son help Marcus overcome a particularly difficult vision of future medical emergencies. "It's how they strengthen each other." Sophia was extraordinary on her own, but with the other children with William, she becomes something unprecedented. The past 6 months had transformed Charles Harrison from a billionaire businessman into something he'd never expected to become. A father to 9 children who would reshape the future of medicine. The legal battles had been fierce. Castellanos' government connections had tried to classify the children as national security assets. But public opinion, carefully managed by Morrison's media contacts, had forced authorities to recognize them as victims, not weapons. Robert Miller had officially become Charles's partner in the foundation, bringing his daughter's wisdom and his own unwavering dedication to protecting children who had been failed by the adults who should have kept them safe. The 2 men, from completely different worlds, had found common ground in their love for the remarkable children in their care. "The latest reports are encouraging," Dr. Chen continued, consulting her tablet. "We've identified 7 more Castellanos facilities across 4 countries. The international task force is moving carefully, but they're making progress. Each rescue operation was guided by the children themselves. Marcus would predict which facilities were about to be abandoned. Sarah would identify which children needed immediate medical intervention. And Sophia would coordinate everything, her young mind holding strategies that impressed military planners and humanitarian organizations alike. But it was the personal transformations that moved Charles most deeply. Emma, who had been terrified and withdrawn when they'd found her in the tunnels, now laughed as she raced through the facility's halls with William, both of them playing games that most adults couldn't even understand. Tommy had discovered that his healing abilities worked best when he was happy, so the entire foundation had become dedicated to ensuring these children experienced the joy that had been stolen from their early years. A soft knock at the observation room door interrupted Charles's thoughts. Sophia entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression that meant she had something important to discuss. "Mr. Harrison," she said formally, though her eyes sparkled with affection, "we need to talk about the Beijing facility." Charles knelt to her eye level, a habit he'd developed during their first weeks together. "What about it, sweetheart? There are 37 children there, and 12 of them are dying from failed modifications," Sophia said with the clinical precision that still amazed everyone who heard it. "We need to go get them ourselves. A regular rescue team won't be able to help the ones who are failing." "Sophia, that's halfway around the world. The diplomatic complications alone will work themselves out if we save the children first and ask permission later," she interrupted gently. "Besides, William had a dream about it last night. He says we're all supposed to go together." "More?" Charles looked through the glass at William, who was now helping Marcus and Tommy understand a complex diagram of cardiac surgery. His son, because William would always be his son, regardless of genetics, had developed his own unique gift over the past months. Not healing, not medical knowledge, but an ability to sense when the family needed to be together for something important. "And if I say it's too dangerous?" Charles asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we'll go anyway and call you from Beijing to apologize," Sophia replied, with the matter-of-fact tone that had become her trademark. "But it would be better if you came with us. We work better when our family is complete." That evening, Charles stood on the foundation's rooftop garden, looking out over the city lights, while 9 children played below in the common room. Robert joined him, both men comfortable in the silence that had developed between them over months of shared purpose. "Elena would be proud," Robert said finally, watching Sophia teach the other children a complex meditation technique. "She would be amazed," Charles corrected. "These children have become something beyond what anyone imagined. Not because of Castellanos' modifications, but because they chose to be family." Below them, laughter echoed from the common room as William successfully performed a simple healing technique under Sophia's patient guidance. His abilities were minimal compared to the others, but his role as the emotional heart of their group was irreplaceable. "So we're really doing this?" Robert asked. "Taking 9 children with supernatural abilities on an international rescue mission?" Charles smiled, feeling more alive than he had in decades. "Robert, 6 months ago, I was a billionaire who thought success meant accumulating wealth. Now I'm planning to break international law to save children I've never met, guided by a 7-year-old girl who can perform medical miracles. And I've never been happier in my life." As if summoned by his words, Sophia appeared on the rooftop, followed by William and the other children. They moved with the unconscious coordination that had developed over months of living together, working together, and choosing to be family together. "We've been talking," Sophia announced, "and we want you to know something important." Charles and Robert turned to face the group of extraordinary children who had changed their lives completely. "We know that people will always want to study us, use us, or be afraid of us," William said, his young voice carrying wisdom earned through trauma and triumph. "But we also know that we have gifts that can help people. So we've decided," Sophia continued, "that we're going to spend our lives finding every child that Castellanos and people like him have hurt, and we're going to save them all." Emma stepped forward, her small hand finding Sophia's. "And we're going to show the world that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be celebrated." Marcus nodded seriously. "We're going to prove that children who have been hurt can still choose to help others." Tommy grinned, his healing abilities making his skin glow softly in the evening light. "We're going to be heroes." Charles felt tears sliding down his cheeks as he looked at these 9 children who had taught him that family wasn't about blood or genetics or social status. It was about choice, love, and the decision to stand together against darkness. "Then I guess we better get started," he said, opening his arms to embrace the most unlikely family in the world. As the children surrounded him and Robert, laughing and planning their next impossible mission, Charles Harrison realized that Sophia had been right from the very beginning. Hearts did have their own language, and when they chose to beat together, they could create miracles that changed the world forever. The experiment was over. The healing had just begun.